I'm Andy Roth, and welcome to the 50 Swamps podcast, where we talk about what's going on in the 50 state legislatures, where Democrats and liberal Republicans pursue reckless policies to take away our liberties, grow government, and advance special interest policies at the expense of you and your family. Thank you for listening, and be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the 50 Swamps podcast. This is the inaugural podcast, the inaugural episode of the 50 Swamps podcast. I am your host, Andy Roth. I am president of the State Freedom Caucus Network. The whole reason why we decided to do this is because there are 50 swamps in the 50 state capitals, and I will argue strenuously that they are worse than D.C. I know that's a bold claim, but I firmly believe it. I run the State Freedom Caucus Network, and let me just give you a brief synopsis of what that is. Back when the House Freedom Caucus in Washington, D.C. was created in 2015, we immediately understood the need to do it at the state level because there are 50 state capitals. And state lawmakers are part-time. They have very little resources. They have a uniparty. They have a swamp that's constantly going after conservative lawmakers. So it was only natural that we should set up state freedom caucuses. And so in 2021, December of 2021, we launched the State Freedom Caucus Network. And our very first Freedom Caucus was the Georgia Freedom Caucus. And we quickly expanded to South Carolina. Then we went to South Dakota, Illinois, Arizona, Pennsylvania, on and on and on. We now have 11 states in our network comprised of 163 lawmakers. And our goal is to get eventually into all 50 states. I joke that Vermont and California are going to take some time and a few others, but we're going to get there because if we're going to save this country, we firmly believe that it has to happen at the state level and rise up because D.C. is a mess. There's all sorts of problems going on in D.C. and the issues that matter most to you. Yes, inflation is bad. The war in Ukraine is something we got to keep focused on. But think of all the issues that matter to you most. It's those that are closest to you at home, whether it's the COVID garbage that happened a couple of years ago, school choice, pornography in school libraries, on and on and on. These issues matter. And nobody knows what's going on in the state capitals. A lot of people don't know who their state rep is, their state senator, and that's what we're trying to fix. So with our first 50 Swamps podcast, I want to highlight Missouri. But before we do that, I want to give you a couple of updates on what's going on across the country. Our Illinois Freedom Caucus, our bluest state, we have 7 members in the Illinois Freedom Caucus. 2 of them were targeted for defeat by the teachers union because our Illinois Freedom Caucus had the gall to protect the school choice program that actually existed in Illinois. And it's a Democrat supermajority. The Republicans, 70% of Republican state lawmakers in Illinois take teachers union money. Let me say that again. 70% of Republicans in the state legislature take teachers union money. That's how swampy it is in Illinois. And our Illinois Freedom Caucus even called on the state Republican Party to disavow any Republican lawmaker who takes teachers union money. And for all this, the teachers union decided to target 2 of our members, Blaine Wilhauer and Adam Niemerg. And they spent over $700,000 in 2 House districts. This isn't like congressional districts where millions is spent. This is just tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The teachers union spent over $700,000 targeting our 2 guys. One of our guys, Blaine, won 80-20. Adam Niemerg won 90-10. Despite all of that money, I've never seen that much money get lit on fire that quickly. But it was a great success, and I'm glad that those guys are coming back to help defend the conservative people that live in Illinois. Second, constitutional carry. Our South Carolina Freedom Caucus and our Louisiana Freedom Caucus authored the bills, shepherded them through, and passed it. So they became the 28th and the 29th state to have constitutional carry. So it's 2 great victories for the Second Amendment. In Wyoming, our Wyoming Freedom Caucus, they launched last year with 8 members, and they proved themselves to be such courageous fighters that they quickly doubled from 8 to 16 members. And just recently, we found out that 4 rhinos in the legislature, including the speaker, just announced their retirement. And I believe that is, they won't admit it personally, but I believe it's because of the success of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus and everything they did. So if you want to get more updates from us, besides on this podcast here, I encourage you to go to our website at statefreedomcaucus.org and sign up for our newsletter. You'll get more updates more regularly that way, but we'd love to have you come on board, love to have you learn more about us. And also on our website is a map of where our states are. So if you live in a state, fortunately, that has a Freedom Caucus, go on there and find out who the state reps are in that Freedom Caucus. If you are in a state that doesn't have a Freedom Caucus, I strongly encourage you to find out who your state rep and your state senator is and ask them why they aren't, because we've got to put the feet to the fire of these people who are doing the bidding of the swamps all across our country. So with that, let's talk about Missouri. If you are listening from Texas or Idaho or Pennsylvania, you may think, I don't want to know what's going on in Missouri. But it's very important that you do hear this, because even though this 50 states are different, they're actually very much alike in how the swamp operates. It's no different, regardless of what state you're in. So today my guest is Tim Jones, who probably everybody on this listening that knows him. And if you don't, I'll be shocked, because Tim knows everybody in the conservative movement, not just in Missouri, but in D.C. So welcome, Tim. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's great to be with you all here, knee-deep in the swamp.
Yeah.
On the set of so many great podcasts that are done here at CPI.
Yeah, one of them is
the Fresh Freedom Podcast. Our good friend, now Congressman Eric Burleson, is one of the co-hosts of that. And I recognize the set, and because I listen to that podcast, I see it pop up on Congressman Burleson's feed quite a bit. So we're all very proud of him. He's one of the guys taking on the swamp monsters here in D.C.
Yeah, House Freedom Caucus member in good standing, too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great. Well, give me some background real quick. And just for the listeners, Tim is the guy behind the curtain who is helping the Missouri Freedom Caucus strategize, plan, vote together. Give me a little bit about your background first, and then we'll get into all the fun stuff.
I always say I'm a recovering politician and lawyer, so you can't throw stones at me now, although maybe you used to in the past. But in all seriousness, very humbled and privileged to have had a great career. I am an attorney by trade, although I haven't actively practiced in 9 or 10 years. I found a lot more fun things to do along the way. I served in the Missouri General Assembly. I was the majority leader and the Speaker of the House. And as many of my friends will attest, I survived the Missouri legislature and kept my integrity and my marriage intact, which is it's hard to do. As you said, state legislatures they're just as swampy and in some cases even worse than in Washington, D.C. And I'm from Missouri originally. I went to school on the East Coast, went to Fordham University and St. John's for law school, practiced law for about 20 years, got into public service along the way, served on my city council in my little hometown of Eureka, Missouri. People will know that because it's the home of Six Flags.
Oh, okay.
Used to be called Six Flags over Mid-America. Now it's Six Flags St. Louis. So that's where I hail from. I served on the city council there, became president of the board, and began my career in politics pretty early. I think I was 28, 29 years old. The state house position opened up. We have term limits in Missouri, so we have 8-year terms in the House or Senate. Seat opened up. I ran for it, became a state rep, and then quickly decided, I'm not just here to punch a button every day, to do what the establishment wants. I'm here for only 8 years, so I want to make a difference. I quickly learned what it meant to be a movement conservative. And I was known as one of the more conservative speakers and floor leaders we've had, which, Andy, you would think that would be easy in a
Nope.
large Republican majority. Boy, what you say is oh so right. The R after the name really means nothing unless you know what the person stands for.
Yeah.
And I quickly learned that just because we had all these Republicans running around, in Missouri, it was not easy to get Republican things done. We took that majority, built it into a supermajority by the time I left, but I had to move heaven and earth on most days to cut taxes, reduce regulations, pass school choice for parents and kids, push back against, we used to call it political correctness. Now it's like this giant wokeatocracy, right? But there was the beginnings of that about 10 or 12 years ago. And you would have thought that I would have everybody standing, lockstep with me, arm in arm, and fighting this. Sometimes you charged out the battlefield, you look behind, and half your caucus is nowhere to be found. Yeah, it's really amazing. So after I termed out in 2015, I really had a great time being Speaker of the House. And so going back and, billing hours, one in 0.2 increments wasn't as exciting to me. I did that for 20 years. I helped a lot of people out. I was very proud of my legal service. But I was also I really loved the public policy aspect of what I was doing. And so I've engaged in a lot of different projects and activities over the years. And that's what led me to the State Freedom Caucus Network. I was incredibly honored to be asked by my movement conservative friends, some of whom I had served with in Missouri, to help be their advisor, their counselor, their chief cat herder as we formed the Missouri Freedom Caucus last December. Also do a lot of work for a lot of other great movement conservative organizations like Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, the ALEC Group. I do a radio show every day in St. Louis on News Talk STL.
Yeah.
We've had you on that station and a lot of other great famous conservatives as well. So I feel like I'm very much a part of the movement. It's exciting to be part of the movement. It's just as hard now, if not harder, than it was when I was Speaker of the House, because there's so many people that put that R after their names and then have either no idea what it means or, even worse, are working directly against those policy positions every day.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your radio show in a little bit.
Okay.
But I want to set up for the listeners how we were able to help your colleagues form the Missouri Freedom Caucus. It usually begins with them coming to us and we have a conversation about what that looks like and how it all works. And it started last year in 2023, and it kind of was in fits and starts. There was, some, who's going to be in the Missouri Freedom Caucus, all that. How does all this work? And one of the things is having a state director, having a Tim Jones, and we couldn't figure out what to do because your name had not come up. And then finally, in November, I believe, your chairman, Rick Bratton, State Senator Rick Bratton, called me up and said, we think we have somebody who's ready to help us. I was like, okay, we're going to have to vet this person and figure it all out. And he said, it's Tim Jones. I was like, oh, okay, no vetting necessary.
Sure.
I've known you for several years.
Yes.
And we were off to the races. And I think between November when Rick told me that to January 5th was the magic day, we helped you guys launch the Missouri Freedom Caucus in St. Charles, Missouri.
Yes.
And it was a great event. You guys did a press conference, and then we had a get together right afterwards, and so many grassroots people showed up. They were all excited. They understood the Freedom Caucus brand, and they knew, wow, this is coming to Missouri. So tell me more about that and how it all came together and what you took from it.
Yes. So first of all, thank you to you and the other folks who are running the State Freedom Caucus Network for launching this entire project, because it is so needed in our state capitals. There are so many state legislatures, including Missouri, who, as the majorities get larger and become supermajorities, they really tend to start wandering in the desert. You would think that with those numbers, they would be more aggressive and get more movement conservative type things done. Some states are decent in that, but I would say by and large, without that North Star, which is what the State Freedom Caucus Network prides itself on being, that's kind of the mission and the motto, people do tend to get lost in the desert. They lose the forest for the trees. There's so much noise in state capitals. There's so many lobbyists and bureaucrats and senior staffers and establishment party people, and they're all telling you to probably do less movement conservative stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's easier, right, to just do the establishment stuff or the special interest stuff. Nobody's feelings are going to get hurt. We're not going to upset the apple cart. And so to have the State Freedom Caucus Network form in the first place, as sort of the natural outgrowth of the U.S. House Freedom Caucus, I think was an excellent idea. And there needs to be eventually 50 state freedom caucuses because every state legislature needs this compass, needs this guidance. So, and it's so identifiable because the grassroots in Missouri and in every other state, they now know what the U.S. House Freedom Caucus is.
Right.
It's not only an established brand, but people know what that brand does. They are the conscience of the Republican majority. Hopefully always the majority and not the minority, but even in the minority, you don't want to lose your way.
Right.
So it's important to have that on the state level too, because a lot of those legislators are making decisions for people's lives and businesses that are going to affect them a lot more than what's going on up here in the ponderous movement of Washington, D.C. Yes, Washington, D.C. can have a major effect on people's lives, but it tends to be a lot more slow moving, whereas legislatures, they gavel in at least every other year, and in many cases they gavel in every year, and they have sessions that range from a couple months to 3 or 4 months, and then they gavel out. They consider and pass hundreds of pieces of legislation, and if you don't have a State Freedom Caucus Network monitoring that, then legislatures, even Republican ones, can generally they can get up to no good. Sometimes it's by accident, sometimes it's on purpose. So to have a Freedom Caucus is I think a key part of every legislature. Missouri had a conservative caucus for a while. It was kind of a
lot of states had those. It's sort of like a social club.
Kind of
coffee club.
Loosely affiliated. Maybe they really don't really have a mission statement, or they have some general guiding principles. But again, what the State Freedom Caucus Network provides is a framework, provides a state director, someone to be the cat herder and to keep everybody kind of moving in the same direction. And in term-limited states, conservative caucuses can come and go.
Right.
This is more of an eternal footprint, right? And to help provide succession planning and institutional memory for the conservatives. Because trust me, the special interests and the bureaucrats and lobbyists, they have lots of institutional memory. And they're more than happy to tell young, new legislators, this is the way we do it around here.
Right. I joke that any state lawmaker, they've got leadership talking to them in one ear and lobbyists in the other ear. And the grassroots is out there, but they don't have the soapbox and the power that the lobbyists and the leadership have. So a Freedom Caucus solves that.
Yes. They become the tip of the spear of the movement conservative. The grassroots generally know every day what the right thing to do on a particular bill is, but they don't know how to get that message or voice across. The Freedom Caucus is the direct line back to those grassroots, because we end up working with all of those individuals and organizations who, don't have highly funded, highly paid lobbyists inside state capitals.
And it's to your point, when you go and charge towards a policy and you look behind you, you want to make sure you've got people there. And that's what a Freedom Caucus does.
Yes.
It shows all the grassroots is ready to go with you.
Yes, we're all individuals, and trust me, when you're dealing with Freedom Caucus members, you have a lot of ego, you have a lot of pride, and you have, for good reason. These are accomplished conservatives. So generally, you say, okay, what is our end game? Do we all agree on that end game? Yes. All right. Well, now, since we agree on that end game, and it's a movement conservative end game, and we're doing great things that are reflected in our Republican Party's platform. That's the other thing. State Freedom Caucus Networks, they get this tag of, oh, you're doing all this crazy alt-right stuff. No, it's just some states have so lost their way, they don't even follow their own party's platforms anymore. So how about we start there?
They're actually hostile towards the platform.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So Freedom Caucuses are designed to move as a block, as a unit, as a force within the larger establishment caucuses, even in the Republican majority or supermajority states, to make sure that those big, often unwieldy majorities or supermajorities actually are moving in the right direction, that they are cutting taxes, reducing regulations, passing more educational freedom for parents and kids, pushing back against the uber woke left, the DEI, the CRT agendas, and
the Republicans who enable the woke left's agenda.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, the thing that drives them all, the out of control spending that we see in state budgets.
Yeah. I want to tell the listeners about what happened 14 days after you launched. You guys set a Guinness record
That's what we heard.
for what happened 14 days. But before we talk about that, I know you can't mention all of them, but mention some of the members of the Missouri Freedom Caucus, because I want our listeners to become familiar with who these folks are and who's taking the arrows in the chest and the knives in the back for us. So just mention a couple of them if you could.
Well, the great thing is we started with 11 founding members. And as I sit here today, we've already expanded to 21 members of the Freedom Caucus because House members and Senate members, they all want to join the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
Like we have a large group of moving conservatives, and some of them are now wanting to join the Freedom Caucus and join the founders. Freedom Caucus membership may not be for everyone, even some of the more conservative members. I look at...
and it is invite only.
It is
right?
invite only. Yeah. You look at somebody on the congressional level like a Thomas Massey, great conservative leader, but not part of the Freedom Caucus. More of an independent warrior, and that's fine. So we have a lot of, I call them Freedom Caucus adjacent people too. So we have 21 actual members, and then we probably have another 20 or 30 Republicans that like to work with us and may or may not receive an invitation to join at some point. So, I got to give a shout out to my great friend. I served with him in the House. He's now in the Senate, Senator Rick Bratton.
Yeah.
He is a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. He's retired, but once a Marine, always a Marine, as I've been told. He is our chairman of the Missouri State Freedom Caucus. Our vice chairman in the House, we chose a leader in the House and the Senate.
Yeah, real quick, the Missouri Freedom Caucus is bicameral.
Yes.
Not all of our states are. Some of them are just House only, but because you guys actually have conservatives in both chambers.
We do.
That's not the case in some states. You went bicameral. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So, and having our Freedom Caucus in both chambers is important because Missouri has a really weird structure where we have one of the smallest senates in the country, and they're all extremely powerful because they all have unlimited filibuster capabilities if they want to deploy them.
The best power in the country, I believe, in all the state senates, Missouri's got the most power of an individual senator, I believe.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And that's important because most of the time we're trying to kill a lot of bad stuff. Not all the time. There's most of our battles this year, we can talk about in a minute, have actually been, again, another myth about Freedom Caucuses is that we want to obstruct and stop everything. Our biggest battles this year was trying to get so-called Republican leadership in the Senate and the House to pass a couple of major priorities that everyone agrees is a priority, but nobody wants to spend the political capital or the time or the effort to get them done.
Yeah.
So having that filibuster power, it's good for movement and for stoppage as well. It's a great tool. On the other hand, the House, big House, we have this gigantic House, 163 members, 110 Republicans. So in order to, sometimes we need the House to help leverage Senate leadership.
Right.
That means we need House Freedom Caucus members as well. So Justin Sparks is our vice chairman in the House. Great guy. Just entered the legislature a year or two ago. He's finishing up his freshman term, running for re-election. Former law enforcement, former police officer. He's been a public servant his whole life. I think he's got 4 or 5 young boys. His wife is a saint. Great family man. Great, great Christian. Great believer in freedom and liberty. Great orator. He would love to do one of these podcasts someday. So we've got 2 great leaders in each chamber. And then they have a lot of help from their colleagues. Senator Bill Eigel running for governor.
Yeah.
So, in fact, Andy, there are 3 current Senate Freedom Caucus members who are running for statewide office. That's the kind of depth and the talent that we have, the kind of public policy chops that we have in the Missouri Freedom Caucus that every state has. You just have to figure out if a Freedom Caucus is right for you. So we have Senator Bill Eigel running for governor. We have Senator Denny Hoskins running for Secretary of State. We have Senator Andrew Koenig, one of the most brilliant public policy architects of tax cuts and educational freedom, I would dare say, in the country, running for state treasurer. Yeah. So that's some of our leadership there. Rounding it out, we have freshman senators Jill Carter and Nick Schroer. And then let's see. Then we have Rick Bratton, of course. He's the third. Yeah. So we have 3 returning members next year. Thank goodness. They'll provide some stability. We have 3 that we're unfortunately going to lose. But we already have some House members who we're looking at who are coming over. They are House Freedom Caucus members like Doug Ritchie, who is one of the most gentle but firm statesmen I've ever met in my life. He is a pastor. He is military as well. He is former military. He is a leader in his community. He is one of the guys who has been pivotal in one of our biggest battles this year, and that's to get education savings account expansion bill across the finish line.
Yeah.
We have people like him. We have young members like Maisie Christensen, who worked up here in the Big Swamp, served under Marjorie Taylor Greene, famous congresswoman. Maisie is one of our youngest members of the House, and she's a Freedom Caucus member.
Still in her 20s.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
My state representative, Holly Jones, very proud that my own state rep qualified to be in the Freedom Caucus and received an invitation. We have so many other members. Ben Keithley, who's an attorney, kind of a younger version of me. I see in him a lot of me, and he's another. Really, we have so many deep thinkers in the Freedom Caucus. These are not bomb throwers. They can throw a bomb if they need to, but they're deep thinkers, and they're very invested in the right public policy that is connected to the Republican Party platform. So, I could go on and on and on about all 21 of them, but it's really an honor to be able to work with these current and future leaders.
Well, let's talk about what happened then.
Yes.
14 short days after you guys all launched. Even before you launched, Senate leadership was tweeting out nasty things about the Missouri Freedom Caucus and how I think he called them swamp creatures.
They heard that we were getting the band back together.
Yeah. But tell us what happened 14 days after.
So we, the founders and you and the rest of the State Freedom Caucus Network team, we had a little mini retreat up here in the D.C. area, got together, met some great folks, got to speak with Mark Meadows and Congressman Burleson and some other folks. We took a picture of all of us up here in Washington, D.C., and that picture went viral. And as I mentioned, there had been a conservative caucus, and that conservative caucus had briefly disbanded, and people were like, oh, thank goodness, don't have to deal with those people anymore. When they saw that we were getting the band back together in a bigger, more I would argue more effective way, and it has been effective, they all freaked out. The swamp completely retaliated because now they knew there was going to be
horsepower,
the rebirth of a lot of horsepower of a conservative caucus called the Missouri Freedom Caucus. The very name sends chills down the spines of the establishment swamp monsters because they know they're going to be held to account, right? And like in Missouri, it's so bad in Missouri with this Republican supermajority. Like I said, this Freedom Caucus wasn't launched necessarily to block, stop, and obstruct things, although we've had to do our fair share of that. We wanted to get things done that leadership was stopping in both chambers. Something called initiative petition reform, so our ballot process wouldn't be hijacked from by out-of-state leftist billionaires. Educational savings account expansion, electoral integrity. So many of these issues that everybody agreed were major priorities, but Senate and House leadership kept saying year after year, oh, it's an election year. Well, it's not an election year, and we got other things to do. Oh, we need to take care of this other thing first. The Freedom Caucus said, no, the Freedom Caucus prioritizes things, builds a platform. We publish that platform all over social media, and every single thing in that platform, it's tied back to the Missouri Republican platform, and more likely than not, every item is probably in the National Republican platform as well. And they don't like that because leadership wants to have their own agendas that don't necessarily have to do with the Republican Party platform, even though they're all elected Republicans.
Yeah.
So they retaliated early on and often. Early and often they retaliated. The Freedom Caucus was pushing the initiative petition reform bill, which everyone said was a priority for the last 6 years, but they didn't get done. It's like, why are you not getting this priority done? You have a supermajority of legislators. Who's stopping this? What special interests outside the Capitol are preventing this? Why is it being derailed? The House would pass it. The Senate would pass it. Both chambers would sometimes pass it. And lo and behold, it would fail on the last day of session.
Oh, we ran out of time.
Yeah, that's in your famous glossary of terms.
Yeah.
So we said early on, the Senate Freedom Caucus members said, we are going to make a point early on in our very long, nearly 5-month-long session. This is going to be a priority, and it needs to move early or they'll kill it again. So they threw down. The Senate members threw down, and they were joined by a couple of Freedom Caucus adjacent folks, which helped to strengthen numbers. And leadership does not like being told what to do, ever, even when it's the right thing to do. They obfuscated, they blocked, they said, oh, we're not slowing it down. They took almost 4 weeks to even refer the bill. The point was well made. Because the Freedom Caucus made that point and embarrassed them and called them out, parking spots were removed from them, staff's salaries were slashed, there were threats that furniture would be moved out of offices next, committee chairmanships were taken away and stripped, and even some committee memberships, I believe, were removed. An example would be,
that's what happened on the 14th day.
Yes.
Is when leadership came out and said, we've had enough of your antics. Your committee chairs are gone. Parking spots are gone. Staff salary docked. It was like a purge.
It was.
A Stalinist purge.
Never saw it before. That's never happened in Missouri General Assembly history going back to the 1820s. I don't think anything like that has ever happened in that dramatic of a fashion. Well, all of the Freedom Caucus members took those hits. They sacrificed their personal ambitions. They were removed of chairmanships and committees. Senator Bill Eigel, Denny Hoskins, and Rick Bratton are all veterans of the United States Armed Forces. They were running some of the veterans military-related committees. They were stripped of those committees, and people who had never served the armed forces were put in their place.
Yeah.
How ridiculous. What an insult. Yeah. And ultimately, though, the Freedom Caucus was right. Suddenly, those issues became a priority of leadership. They moved them. We're now very close to passing them. A lot of bad things can still happen, but it's only because of the efforts of the Freedom Caucus early in session that those bills ever got off of center. I am convinced that leadership, especially in the Senate, fully intended to kill these major Republican movement conservative grassroots priorities this year.
Well, and what I love about my job and about what you guys are doing is that if a Missouri Freedom Caucus had not existed, and if these state senators like Bill Eigel, Rick Bratton, Nick Shore, if they had picked this fight and they lost and got punished, there's a fair chance that they would have said, "Oh well, we got punished. We'll back off. We're done." But because they were united under a Freedom Caucus, they had strength and power.
Yes,
and they won.
That's exactly right. If you look at any of our social media handles, it's Mo Freedom Caucus on Twitter X or Missouri Freedom Caucus on Facebook. You can see our list of priorities. That's one of the first things we did. That's one of the first things you all at the State Freedom Caucus Network taught us to do was have our own platform that's directly tied to your state's Republican Party platform or the biggest issues of the day. Number one on our list was that initiative petition reform. And if we hadn't formed the Freedom Caucus, if we hadn't stuck together through very thick and very thin of having all these horrible things happen, some of these legislators are in their last year. And I think it would have been a very lonely, sad, disappointing place for them all to be if all these bad things would have happened and they hadn't had the Freedom Caucus be like, this is part of a bigger mission and goal. We are all thrilled to be at the point where we are now in session, even with chairmanships and parking spots and everything taken away, because none of that is as important as saving the state of Missouri from out-of-state leftist billionaires from continuing to corrupt our Constitution. They're attacking our Constitution every year. The bill that the Freedom Caucus pushed is an opportunity to fix that once and for all.
Well, and like I said, if they had tried to do this without a Freedom Caucus behind them, they may have, maybe not have picked the fight in the first place. But the fact that they picked it, got punished, and then won, I think is amazing. But the best part, I remember it very clearly. I remember turning on my computer in the morning and going through my Twitter feed, and I saw a handful of the senators get out their lawn chairs, get out coffee mugs like this, and sit in front of their empty parking spot that was no longer theirs, and they did a Facebook Live to say, you can take away our parking spot. That doesn't matter, but we're still going to fight. Mm-hmm. I absolutely loved seeing that.
They called it the Parking Lot Podcast, and you're not going to believe this. It still happens to this very day.
Oh, it does?
Every week or two, one of the senators says, time to do a Parking Lot Podcast. They get out their mugs, they get out their lawn chairs, and they go down into the Senate garage parking area where their spots used to be. They pitch a tent there, and they do a Parking Lot Podcast. So it was one of the great things that we branded out of what leadership thought they were doing to punish us. Leadership their punishment ended up being very hollow. It gave us all the attention nationally that we couldn't have bought. And then people woke up and were like, wow, this Freedom Caucus is doing the right thing. Is there a Freedom Caucus in every state? What states have a Freedom Caucus? Is this a problem? And as you said when we first started, there are major problems in our state legislatures, even the ones run by Republicans, that have lost their way and are not doing movement conservative public policy and stopping the swamp sludge, as we call it, every single year.
So right after you guys got kicked off of committee chairs, parking spots taken, furniture threatened to be taken away, something absolutely magical happened after that, which is the grassroots on their own decided that they were going to come out in droves to support you guys. Tell us what happened there.
So they decided, various grassroots groups. There was a plethora of them. It was dozens of them. They all got together, courtesy of social media. Right? They all started talking to each other on Twitter and Facebook, and without our even requesting it, they decided to have a rally at the Capitol.
And the purge happened, I believe, like on a Thursday or a Friday, and the rally was on the Tuesday. Like they whipped it together.
Hundreds of people came to the Capitol from the four corners of Missouri and everywhere in between. We had an impromptu rally in the catacombs of the Capitol building.
Yeah, explain that, because I haven't been to Jefferson City myself, but when I saw that, it was perfect the way it was all set up.
We have
the catacombs.
Yeah, we have a big, beautiful Capitol, and it's 4 floors, and the second floor has this really cool, intricate series of corridors and archways. It's on the second floor, but it kind of looks like the catacombs of the Capitol because it's got some real good mood lighting, and there's a lot of artwork in there honoring Missouri's past, present, and future. And at some point they were trying to say, the administrators were trying to say, well, you guys need a permit. We're like, well, to do what? To have the people be in the people's house?
Yeah.
And then they decided we didn't need a permit.
My permit is the First Amendment.
Yes. And we weren't taking up any of the spaces that were reserved for other groups that day. We just found an area on the second floor where nobody was utilizing. Our Capitol's huge. It's very similar to the U.S. Capitol in its design and its features and its form. And so we just found a place there, and we had a rally. It lasted about half an hour, 40 minutes, and saying
God bless America.
Song broke out, speeches were given.
And because it's so cavernous, the sound and the echoes was just
echoed throughout
gorgeous.
The building. It was really cool. And that gave even more credence and support and attention to the Freedom Caucus. And it was as if the cavalry had rode in, not only from Missouri, but beyond. We were all of a sudden, movement conservatives from all over the country were paying attention to the fact that that we're learning a Freedom Caucus had been launched in Missouri. Members of the U.S. House Freedom Caucus were like, yeah, you go, Missouri. And they came to our aid as well, because people were attacking us. They were saying, that Missouri Freedom Caucus, that's just something that was created in Washington, D.C. and blah, blah, blah. Well, the folks up here who fight in the Freedom Caucus said, no, that's basically it's kind of a loose affiliation. We believe in the same things they do, right? We believe in their philosophy, their principles, their platforms. They're getting attacked the same way we did when we launched 10 or 11 years ago. So we're so excited that we have these now popping up in the states. They're incubators of current and future leadership, as well as ways to get good principled legislation across the finish line.
And then one last thing about the whole punishment, the purge, and then the rally. There's a third thing that happened, which is one of the members of the establishment, Cindy McLaughlin, a state senator, she said that, and I'm not going to get her words correctly, but she basically suggests that maybe Bill Eigel, Missouri Freedom Caucus member, should be expelled from the state Senate for him partaking in all of this. Tell me more about that.
So as I mentioned, Senator Eigel is running for governor, and in the very beginning days of the Freedom Caucus, and by the way, a lot of this has changed since then for the better. You explained to me like all the different levels of retaliation that would happen against state freedom caucuses. First, the establishment swamp would deny our very existence, ignore, deny, try to dismantle, try to disrupt, try to divide wedges, and then there would be this grudging kind of acceptance starting to seep in, and then we would become part of the fabric of the building in a good way, in that guiding force. So yeah, in the early days, the majority leader, Cindy O'Laughlin, was thinking and saying, well, this is just some invention that Bill Eigel had in his head. There's no State Freedom Caucus Network. There's no group of Freedom Caucus. This is something Bill Eigel's using to run for governor. Bill's like, I'm sure that there's a benefit to me, but I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this because I served 8 years here, and the leadership refuses to move forward on so many of these priorities we've been trying to push across the finish line. So if I can start something now that becomes a legacy for after I'm gone, then that would be the best possible thing ever. And she basically tried to make him the boogeyman instead of addressing the fact there was a Freedom Caucus with, at that point, 16 members and growing. And she tried to personalize it to him. Bill didn't let that happen. He didn't make it about himself. He said, no, I'm one of many members of the Freedom Caucus, and it's the Freedom Caucus that wants to do this. It has nothing to do with my personal ambition. So you can try to make me the boogeyman all you want and try to literally expel me from the state Senate. Over the last couple months, Cindy O'Loughlin has had a huge change of tune because, in fact, fast forwarding past the initial petition reform battle, we had another battle on education savings accounts. The Freedom Caucus, again, voted in block, in mass, to move that bill forward. We helped Senate leadership. Suddenly, Cindy O'Loughlin and Bill Eigel and myself now talk on almost a weekly basis when she needs Freedom Caucus assistance with some of the more moderate, swampy members of her caucus. She's not a bad person. She, I just think, had lost her way. Yeah. And maybe we provided a bit of a compass for her as well.
Well, also, I wouldn't be surprised if voters in her district were saying, hey, what's going on?
Right.
These Missouri Freedom Caucus guys are fighting for what we believe in. And where are you at in this?
Yeah, our agenda, like I said, it's posted on social media. When you read that agenda, how can you say, yeah, Cindy O'Loughlin should be opposed to that agenda? She's opposed to cutting taxes. She's opposed to reducing regulations. She's opposed to an actual balanced budget, which Missouri honestly hasn't had in years. Cindy O'Loughlin is someone who's really in favor of education reform. She's opposed to that. No, she actually agrees with Freedom Caucus principles and platforms. It's just, you know how it is. Leadership doesn't like to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they need to be reminded what the right thing is to do.
So, like I mentioned before, I want to talk about your radio show because what the setup that you have is so special, and I love just the idea of it, which is you're in Jeff City with the Missouri Freedom Caucus. You fight your fights, and then you go on your radio show and tell everybody about it on a daily basis. What's that like? I mean,
sometimes right in the middle of the Capitol. So yeah. I want to give a big shout out to State Senator Nick Schroer, who has been one of my very good friends for a long time. He was in the House. I helped him get elected to the Senate. So proud that he's part of the Freedom Caucus. He's a big radio guy too. In fact, he has a little Sunday night show. I shouldn't say little. I used to have a little Sunday night show. He has an awesome Sunday night show on my station, News Talk STL out of St. Louis. And so Nick was the perfect person to host a podcast like this in his office. So we set up Studio Schroer in Nick's office. When I'm in Jefferson City, I'm able to go on air live in the bowels of the Capitol and report with all my Freedom Caucus members by my side. A bunch of them will jump in and out, and we will talk about these priorities. We have so many Freedom Caucus members that are regulars on our station because we have 6 local shows that come out of our station in St. Louis, which we just launched 3 years ago. We're a startup as well. And I would say that to a T, all of the hosts and the co-hosts and the producers on those shows, they're Freedom Caucus type people too. They often wonder, why isn't Jefferson City getting more done? So they love having Freedom Caucus members on to talk about what's really going on behind the scenes and what the Freedom Caucus is trying to do to advance Republican priorities. So News Talk STL has been a big part of moving this forward. We're happy to have other legislators on, and we do.
Yeah, you have the Illinois Freedom Caucus
right
across the river.
Illinois Freedom Caucus,
yeah.
And sometimes we have the more moderate, swampy folks on to challenge them and ask them, why aren't they pushing more Freedom Caucus priorities? So it's a great megaphone and amplifier of what we're doing. And we have plenty of Illinois folks on as well. We've had some of the national folks on. We've had Congressman Burleson on to talk about the U.S. House Freedom Caucus. So everything that I've been able to put together as a tool for the Freedom Caucus, it's been very cohesive, and we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. And let me tell you, if you're in a state that has a Freedom Caucus or wants one, you need an arsenal of public policy weaponry to push back against the establishment swamp.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk about over and over and over is that it's not enough to just vote correctly. Mm-hmm. You have to plan and strategize with each other, but more importantly, or most importantly, out of all of that, you have to be loud.
Yes.
And the fact that you guys are doing the right thing, and then you're going on the radio show and telling the whole world what they're doing, it just puts a huge wind in your sails to where the establishment has no response. They can't answer to
Correct.
that.
We have to overwhelm them.
Yeah.
So not only my radio station, but I'm the radio industry. It's like any other club or career. Everybody knows everybody. So I say, of course, I want them on News Talk STL, but I want them to go on all the radio stations in all. Missouri's a big state, 10th largest state by geography, over 6 million people. So I say, yes, come on News Talk STL, but go on all your local radio shows as well. And they've done that. And they've written op-eds. And they all have very active Twitter, X, and Facebook feeds. Very active. Instagram. We're still getting used to the whole Substack thing, but we're going to start doing that more too. I say the more, the merrier. Do as much as you can. Go on every podcast. Go on every radio station. Use all the social media feeds. Some of us are better Facebookers. Fine. You focus on that. Others of you are better on Twitter X. Others of you are better with Instagram. Use them all. Use everything because, yes, you have to be loud. You have to be proud. And you have to be persistent because we're getting pushback every day. And we still do. Even though we're becoming more of an established commodity now, they still would rather the Freedom Caucus not exist.
Yeah.
So every day you have to push back against their agenda and their talking points.
Jim Jordan, I believe this is attributed to him, but I think about it a lot, is he says that when you get tired of saying something, that's the moment when people are actually just now beginning to listen.
Correct.
So it's not enough to just do a radio interview here or there. You got to be constantly communicating your principles and your priorities because eventually somebody's going to hear it for the first time.
7 to 10 times, they say, before it starts really sinking in. You and I, we drink this from a fire hose every day. We get it. But, Americans are busy. Missourians are busy. People are saying families. They have to take care of not only in this day with the sandwich generation, we're taking care of parents and we're taking care of children, we're taking care of businesses. We have busy lives to lead, so they need to be told this, and so you have to amplify, you have to expand. So this podcast, radio shows, social media, it's so important to do it all. Writing op-eds, because the swamp and the establishment, they use all those tools, and they have the mass media at their disposal.
Right. And they leak to the media. They work in concert with the corporate media. They do everything. And so if we have any chance of winning, we have to do it ourselves.
That's right.
Let's wrap up with what's the path forward for the Missouri Freedom Caucus? You've got a couple of issues that you need to tackle. When does session end? What do you got going on? And then just tell me what the path forward looks like.
The big gavel drops in Missouri on Friday, May 17th. Thank goodness it's constitutional. You can't extend it. And we have one of the longest sessions in the country for a part-time legislature. So we've got 5 weeks left. We're in the home stretch. And then we intend to have the Missouri Freedom Caucus be a year-round effort. We have a citizen legislature, but again, moving as a block, moving as a unit, moving towards a common goal. We will work during the interim, what we call the interim months, to continue to promote Freedom Caucus priorities, policies, philosophies. We'll take a look at the agencies. We'll use, many of us will be on, many of the members will be on interim committees, so we'll use that as well. We want to continue to ferret out the waste, the fraud, and the abuse, the woke-autocracy, as I call it, in state government. We'll do that. We'll continue to amplify our message on all the things I just mentioned, and we'll be looking to grow. This August will be the Missouri primary season, Tuesday, August the 5th or 6th, whatever that Tuesday is. There are a lot of candidates who have signed up, who have been inspired. Some of us have been inspired by the launch of the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
And we'll take a look at their records. We'll take a look at the surveys they filled out. We'll likely invite many of them to join. So like I said, this is not a one-time shot. This is legacy building for the future.
That's amazing. Well, thanks, Tim. This is the first podcast, so you don't know the format, but basically what I want to do at the end of every podcast is give you all some recommendations on what to do next. Obviously, follow Tim on Twitter, X,
at Speaker Tim Jones.
At Speaker Tim Jones. I'm at Andy Roth. Greg Price is the State Freedom Caucus Network's communications director. He's a Gen Z guy. Amazing guy. He's at Greg_Price11. So that's Greg_Price11. He's got a huge following. I think he's up to like 360,000 followers. Elon Musk retweets him every once in a while.
He's such a great amplifier of all the Freedom Caucus messaging.
And then follow the State Freedom Caucus Network on Twitter as well. That's SFC_network. SFC_network. And then follow all of our states. You said Missouri is MO Freedom Caucus on Twitter.
Yes.
If you're not in Missouri, see if any of the wherever you live, see if they have a Freedom Caucus. Also, just some other recommendations. I think very highly of the Blaze, Glenn Beck, those guys. Download and subscribe to the Conservative Review podcast hosted by Daniel Horowitz. He's a great ally of ours. He firmly believes that state freedom caucuses are the way to go. I'm a big fan of his, and he does amazing work. So listen to him. He just interviewed our South Carolina State Director, Evan Newman. So that's a great thing to listen to. A couple of other things, just offshoots. Masters of the Air is on Apple Plus. And for everybody that knows the Band of Brothers, this is now 20 years later. And it's Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, are we going to get into this woke stuff? But Masters of the Air is about the 100th Bomb Group in World War II. And I thought it was a great miniseries. And if you love the Band of Brothers, I think you'll like Masters of the Air.
I love Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
I try to rewatch it every year.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So I'm looking forward to checking on this out.
And there's only just a little bit of wokeness.
Okay.
Just a
not bad for Hollywood.
Yeah. And then I've got a book recommendation. It's called The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe. I recommend folks listening to this. Basically, one turn is 20, 25 years. And his argument is after every fourth turn, something cataclysmic happens in our country. 80 years ago, it was World War II. Before that, it was the Civil War. Before that, it was the Revolutionary War. And his argument is that we're kind of getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And some hallmarks of a fourth turning is a debasement of the currency. So inflation is rearing up. A lack of trust in institutions. We saw that on steroids with COVID and the CDC and the World Health Organization and Congress in general, low approval rating, everything like that. But he basically outlines all this, and I think it's a great book. So I encourage everybody to listen to it. That's it. That's all I got. You got any recommendations?
Sure. I'm a big series guy. I like to watch, the streaming series, Yeah. And if you're really into like the political thrillers that have kind of based in different atmospheres or times, kind of people taking on insurmountable odds, which is like a lot of what the Freedom Caucus does every day. I feel like some of these fighters. I loved I think it's on Netflix now, The Last Kingdom, which is all about the unification of England and all of the 7 kingdoms of England back around the Dark Ages. The main protagonist is a guy who was an Englishman raised by the Danes. So he lived in both the English world of Christianity, but he was raised by the Vikings. His name is Uhtred, son of Uhtred, and he kind of is this guy who's got one foot in both worlds. He's a master of all but a slave to none, basically. And he ultimately believes in the unification, right? But yet he's conflicted a lot throughout this. So it's a fantastic series. It's about 6 or 7 seasons long. A lot of great history. It is loosely based on the the history of the time, and it's just a lot of politics, a lot of drama, and it's a lot about never giving up, even when you look like you're facing insurmountable odds, which is a lot of what we do every single day in state legislatures.
Well, that's a great way to end it. Thank you, Tim Jones, State Director of the State Freedom Caucus Network in Missouri. Thanks for coming on board. Sorry you had to come to D.C. for the swamp and live in the swamp, but it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it's great having you.
Thank you, Andy. Coming to D.C. is like going to Vegas. It's a great place to visit for 2 or 3 days, and then you got to get the heck out. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim, and thank you everybody for listening. Take care, and we'll talk to you again. Thanks for listening to the 50 Swamps podcast. Be sure to tune in to the next episode. As always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.